Welcome to the 360 Pulse podcast by Circle Optics, the intersection of hardware, imaging science, and AI. I am your host, Jennifer Sertle. As we kick off 2025, we're excited to bring you a refreshed and dynamic season of conversations that dive deeper into the cutting-edge world of imaging science and immersive technology. This year, our focus is twofold. First, we aim to make the podcast more personal by spotlighting the incredible people within our ecosystem and team who drive innovation every day. Second, we're turning up the tech-savvy dial, bringing you insights at the intersection of hardware, software, and AI. Expect engaging discussions that explore the real-world applications of panoramic imaging and the transformative impact of technology on industries. We're excited to kick off 2025 with a very special guest, Don Golini, Chairman of Luminate Accelerator, a champion of innovation. He has been instrumental in advancing startups in optics and photonics, and we're honored to have him share his insights with us. He's very modest, so he's not going to like the next 3 sentences, but I am going to give a little bit more about him. He brings over 20 years' experience in developing, managing, and commercializing cutting-edge technologies. As Chairman of Luminate and as Circle Optics Advisory Board member, he supports early-stage companies through investments, mentoring, and strategic guidance. He's also an angel investor with 7 U.S. patents. Don has significantly advanced precision optics manufacturing and is widely held as a leader in the field. And during his tenure as founder and president of QED Technologies, you might have seen one of his machines on The Sopranos. I remember seeing that, and it caused a big old smile. Don, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So because Luminate right now is curating cohort number 10 and Circle Optics was part of cohort number 2, I'm going to begin by asking you as chairman of the advisory board, what has been some of the most rewarding aspects of guiding startups through this particular program?
Yeah, so actually, Luminate's going into its 8th year. So we just graduated our 7th cohort.
Oh, it's 8. Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
And you know, when I work with the teams, I mean, the main thing is I learn so much because my background is in from a technology standpoint. I'm learning every day. My background is much more around more traditional, conventional optical devices and products, and the diversity that you see come through Luminate now. I mean, optics and photonics has such a huge footprint in so many different domains that, it's hard to keep up, and I learn every day. But, the rewarding piece for me is I think I can help the companies because I've had such a similar experience to the one they're about to embark upon. When we started QED, we came out of a university. So, this is a technology that we developed for 3 or 4 years in a university setting. And there was really no eye toward commercialization. We were just developing it because it was interesting and because it was a new enabling capability. And when it became obvious that, there was no commercialization plan, I ended up deciding to write a business plan almost out of frustration more than anything else. I was never motivated to be an entrepreneur, but we had a solution to a problem that I knew existed. And that experience, I started at the university with a working prototype. I had to write a business plan to convince myself and my board that this business even made sense, and had to recruit a board, had to recruit a founding team. We had to find space and that we could afford. And we spent 2 years developing a commercial product from a prototype. And it took 2 years. We had a functional prototype. And before you could have a product that could go into a customer's facility, it took 2 years of development, software development, hardware development, multiple iterations, lots of customers looking at it, providing feedback. And then we finally sold some equipment. So, we had to really engage in the sell side and the customer focus. We had to expand the team. We had licensed technologies from the university, which required some negotiation. There were lots of mechanics that go into that process. And then, of course, growing and selling the company gave me the span of experience that almost every team coming into Luminate will go through. And some of them have gone through some of it, and some have gone through a lot of it. Some have gone through none of it. And just having that experience puts me in a good position to offer just small insights. And sometimes it's the smallest things. It can be recruiting a key player, or dealing with an HR issue, or helping set up stock incentive programs, option programs for the company. There's a lot of mechanics you go through that aren't obvious the first time you go through them. And so it's nice to have somebody that can kind of give you some guidance and maybe help out along the way, because all of those seemingly little things, they present their own challenges, especially if it's the first time you're doing it.
Actually, the little things you just mentioned, I think, are huge strategic playbook issues. So I think that's really great. How did you have to change as a leader from when you were actually at the university, in that kind of, I would say, more of a cocoon than in the wild west of the world?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I had a big advantage that I worked in industry for about 7 or 8 years before I came back to the university. So I kind of lived in, I wouldn't say the real world, but I was out there as a working engineer doing, my first job, we were making these huge telescope mirrors, and, these were 24-hour operations. So, and I worked in the manufacturing side of the business. So, you really got a sense of, strong work ethic and all the teamwork and things that have to come together to do a complicated project. So having that as a base of experience helped a lot when I came to manage a research program at the university. But you're right. When you go from any kind of big setting where you have lots of support staff and lots of people that do, really experts in tons of functions, and now you're at a 5-person startup, and you kind of have to learn a lot of things that you used to depend on other people to take care of. So I think that if your question was kind of the skills that transfer from university or industry to startup, you have to learn a lot more. You need a lot more bandwidth, and you have to be open to advice, in my opinion. I was really fortunate at QED. One of my first advisors and board members was Paul Foreman, who was the founder of Zygo Corporation. And Paul had essentially done kind of what we were trying to do at QED 35 years before I started. And he was retiring as the founder, CEO, just as I was starting the company. And he agreed to come on and be a board member. And I can't tell you, if there's one thing I learned from that, is Paul taught me to really avoid mistakes instead of fix mistakes. It's a lot cheaper. And if you surround yourself with people who've done the kinds of things that you're trying to do, they've done it before, they've made the mistakes, or they've seen the traps. I really benefited by, avoiding a lot of mistakes by listening to a great team of board members and advisors that I had around me from the time I wrote the business plan. Because my vision was that, I didn't want to start the company if I really didn't believe it would succeed. So I had to convince myself, I had to convince my board for my own sanity that this whole thing made sense. And that 5-person board was with me from when I started the company and wrote the business plan till the day I sold the company. So you form great friendships. You have trusted advisors who want to help you. And if you're receptive to taking that advice, you can really benefit tremendously, in my experience. So it's great to be in a position now to try to do that for others. And I'm not sure I do it as well as they did it for me, but I try. Well,
I was actually just going to say, and to some degree, you're our Paul, and we are working to listen and learn. And so grateful that you've built something and exited it, and you have industry experience. So we're grateful that you're able to be part of our team at Circle Optics. One more question about Luminate, then we'll move on a little bit more. How has the program changed a little bit, or what companies are you seeing different? What trends are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I understood the technology of the earlier cohorts more than I do today. And the transition is that, as I mentioned, my background is much more in traditional optics and the kinds of things that Circle does, making cameras and lenses. And when you look at the companies today, I didn't come up with any statistics, but close to half of them are involved in photonic integrated circuits and microelectronic type products that are really out of my domain expertise. But there's still a common thread of the business challenges that you find when you do a startup. So I help them more on the business side than I do on the technology side, because the technologies are so diverse and so different than what you might think of as traditional optics, lenses and prisms and mirrors.
So on a technical side, what I'm hearing you say is that interoperability has become much more important into these systems because they have to integrate with so many more systems. At least that's where we're aware of imaging science capability optics, but now we have to add the AI component, and that integration is kind of the secret sauce that we're still learning about.
Absolutely. And so, if you look at quantum, if you look at a lot of semiconductor applications, if you look at any kind of AR, VR, there's some element of traditional optics, but a lot of it is PICs. I mean, they're using for sources, for detectors, for sensors. They're all built into the chip, and a lot of even the processing happens at the chip scale. And that's just a whole different bunch of science, but it's so enabling. And optics is still powering, those devices. So it's optical science, but it's packaged in a very different way. And much more functional, as you're pointing out. I mean, people want functionality in the end device, and a lot of it's built in.
Yeah, I think that one of the hardest things is that to do prototyping and to get the spec and to design for the spec, it's very challenging because, we're imagining systems and then we have to go and find, do we get the spec right? That sort of thing. In your experience, how, as some of the companies that you've started have done great customer discovery and are great at the R&D piece, how do you advise them to kind of get prepared for more of that scale?
Yeah, I think Steve Blank made, the term customer discovery kind of famous. And we all, throw customer discovery around, and it's almost, I see sometimes it's almost treated as a checkbox, like I have to do customer discovery if I'm going to do a business model or if I'm going to convince investors. And they look at it as almost a necessary evil. Like, yeah, we did customer discovery, talked to 100 customers, and we got lots of feedback. And, customer discovery isn't a small thing. It's not like just something you kind of have to do because advisors tell you to do it. Customer discovery is everything. It's what distinguishes, in my view, kind of a technology from a business. You're really not a business until you're selling something to real customers. And so when you think of business that way, then the customer discovery is almost everything. Like the technology, of course, has to work. But if you're not solving a problem for someone who cares about it, then you don't have a business. And so it's really important to bring the customer into the discussion very early on. It's not just a conversation. It's a deep conversation about, what would it take for us to develop something that you would actually spend money on because it would benefit your business. It would be 10 times better than what you're doing today. And to get that information is far more than a discussion. It's a relationship that you have to develop with the customers where they trust you enough to even share the important information, that's going to make you successful or not. So, I think that it's critical if you're ever going to scale a business to deeply understand your customers' problems and then morph your technology into a solution that they really care about. And so many of us, develop a technology, a product, a process that we think is the right thing, and we don't want to share it even with the customer until it's done and we can show it to them. And I think that's a big mistake. And companies who fall into that bucket really have trouble scaling and even getting their first customers, because you spend a lot of money, as you can imagine, you spend a lot of money developing that first product. And if you get a few things wrong because you weren't talking to customers, then it's a huge setback, because you finished your product, you spent a lot of your investment money, and you developed the wrong thing. So yeah, I think that's maybe the most important step in all of the business preparation before you launch and while you launch.
I think, when this program comes out, I'm going to actually bookmark exactly the last 2 minutes, because what was really important, I hope all of you listeners, just take a pause for a minute. Many of us, even if we do customer discovery, and I agree, sometimes they say you have to have 100 conversations before you put your business model together and show that you've had them and show, But what I heard you say with the query, the question that you ask is so fundamentally different on the way that you represent it. Instead of how would you or how do you, what I heard you say, Don, was, what would it take? And that's a very different angle on customer discovery. And one I haven't, I've been around the block a little bit, and I haven't heard a question phrased that well before. Can you repeat that question one more time? What would it take?
Well, I don't know. I mainly just, you have to have a trusted relationship with the customer so that you can really understand what their issues are, what their challenges are, what's important to them when they explore new technology. Like if they're interested in your product, what do we have to provide to you as a solution for this to be valuable to you? And a lot of times, like the little things that they really need, they might be proprietary to the company, and they don't want to openly share a lot of that. So a lot of times you have to really develop that trusting relationship so you can fully understand, what is it that's going to be less of a curiosity and more of a need and a solution for your business. Wow. And again, there's a deep knowledge of who you're selling to.
In Rochester, New York, it is snowing and it's really beautiful. And I have a husky, so I took her on a walk this morning before our call, and we always go past this beautiful field with horses. And I'm thinking of the idea of treating your customer like a wild horse that you have an apple and you want them to come to take a bite out of the apple. In that it does, I love your point that to really get their fundamental need, you actually have to have rapport and a relationship and probably some history as well. So I think those are really good points.
That helps, for sure.
Yes. So balancing vision and execution, that is certainly a struggle for a lot of startups. So I'd love you to maybe talk about some things that you've noticed as you've been advising people on how they've been able to learn how to balance, the big vision and execution.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I one without the other is kind of is useless almost. You can't be executing to something that no one understands what they're doing or why they're doing it. But the flip side is, having a great vision without putting the team in place to execute is also a problem. So I think that, your question kind of nails two really important things that you need to build a team, to motivate a team. You need to communicate your vision, understand the vision, know that the vision is the right vision. And that, again, comes through knowledge of your market and knowledge of the problems that exist that you're trying to solve, and letting your team understand, what they're trying to solve, why they're trying to solve it, why is it a pain point for their customer. But then execution is everything, right? It's like that you look at, where teams can stumble. It's where there's not enough focus. If you don't understand what you're trying to accomplish, it's really hard to focus on the execution side. But if you can, really identify exactly what you're doing, who you're doing it for, why you're doing it, what kinds of things need to be there, what kinds of things don't need to be there. I always say that in my opinion, as in this stage of the company where you're still developing the product and you're trying to get it to market, one of the most important functions of the CEO is to know, like, how good is good enough in the execution plan. Because as we all have experienced, right, in engineers, you have a brilliant team. They have their own ideas. They have their own kind of, metrics for what's good enough. And if they don't have exposure to the customer, they have no way to draw an endpoint, because it can always be better. Your software can always be better. Your hardware can always put more functionality. The only person who really sees the big picture, and it really only has the vantage point to see it, because you're out there talking to, whether it's investors, our customers. Like you're seeing, what the outside world needs, where your engineers don't have that luxury. And you also have to understand the technology enough to know what's doable and what's not doable so that you can communicate that to the customer. But at the end of the day, when you're ready to release that first product, there's almost never 100% agreement certainly in the engineering team that it's done. Like it's never done. You can always make it better. And no one wants to take the risk, just it's a kind of a human instinct. Like nobody wants to let something go when it's 80% done. The only person who can really know that 80% is good enough for the market today. We can save the other 20 and maybe we'll do it in the future. Maybe it's a different 20% that we hadn't thought about. Mm-hmm. But somebody has to draw the line and say, we're done. And if the customer's not happy with that, it's on me. It's not on you as an engineer or developer. So yeah, I think the execution, a lot of difficulty in execution often lies around, the endpoint determination. And I think it's a really important role of the leader of the company to have an intuition. And you might be right and you might be wrong. You can't make big mistakes, but you have to be able to get your team comfortable with kind of saying, yes, this is what we're releasing.
We're kind of in the pivot now. Like what I hear you ask is like Circle Optics often asks, what could it do? And we need to be asking, what does it need to do? Right? That distinction, I think, is really important for where we are as a company, which is great. As someone deeply involved in innovation entrepreneurship, and you have a track record and you've given back over the years. So, what keeps you motivated to still stay as involved as you are with these companies that you're supporting?
Mainly I'm learning a ton. And I feel like I'm moving the needle a little bit for some of the companies. And like I said, it could be the smallest things, but small mistakes early on can turn into really big problems later when you go to raise money or when you go to sell the company. If you don't have, there's so many things around corporate governance where you want to have minutes to your board meetings. You want to have board meetings. You want to make sure that employees sign NDAs and employees sign non-competes and intellectual property agreements. Like there are so many things that when you're moving fast in the beginning, you think, oh, we'll get to that later. And, so 2 years go by and people invented lots of things for the company and you don't have an intellectual property ownership agreement. It becomes a much tougher conversation 2 years from now than it is when employees start with the company. So there are just certain things that you should do correctly from the beginning. And if I can help teams kind of guide them through that and make better decisions early on, it can be stock allocation, ownership allocation for founders. You see when we've had over 70 teams come through, and there's almost no scenario that we haven't kind of come across. And most of them are ones that, if the teams had earlier advisors that could steer them, they could have steered their way out of problems that can creep up later. So, I stay involved because I love to help teams. And maybe equally importantly, maybe more importantly, I'm just learning so much about, areas in photonics that I knew nothing about before. So it keeps it fun.
Wow, that's really, really exciting. Last question I have, we have a really great relationships with both Rochester Institute of Technology and University of Rochester. And a lot of our listeners actually are students in those schools simply because that's kind of where we travel. What advice do you have for the students that are maybe 18 to 21 years old about innovation or anything you wished that someone had told you when you were in college?
Oh, gosh.
These are fun questions, aren't they?
Yeah, I guess I would say, to me, the most important thing, I had an engineer once who was the software developer, just a brilliant, wonderful guy. And he had been a software developer for years, but kind of self-taught, kind of homegrown. And at one point he said he had to join Xerox for a few years. And he saw that as his way of putting it is like, I had to join the Army. I wanted to work in a professional, big company, big environment with professional developers and kind of learn learn the formal training, go through basic training camp, and go through the process of that formal learning. And so I guess if I were to give, and I thought that was really great, and it made him a better developer, right? I think the notion of jumping out of school and starting a company, it works sometimes, maybe. It does work sometimes, right? We know the famous people who've done it, but I think you're far better served by joining the army, right? Like joining a company, an established company, and work there for 5, 6, 7, 10 years and learn make your mistakes on somebody else's nickel who can tolerate it and is designed to accept that, but go get mentored, become an expert in something, build a network, go to trade shows, go to conferences, present papers. If you're in a technology space, I think you're far better served working for a company. It can be a startup, it can be an established company, but go work and learn, because you know a lot about technology. But to build a business, if you ever want to become an engineer, an entrepreneur, I think you're so much better served if you have your own Rolodex of relationships and people and your own reputation. Because one of the first things you're going to have to do is recruit people, right? And, when a founder says, well, I can't recruit my founding team, it's like, well, that's essential. That's like saying I can't drive my car without gasoline. Like, you need to be able to recruit the founding team. And to do that, you need to know a lot of people. You need to have a bit of a reputation. You have to, kind of establish yourself. And that goes for the marketplace, the customer. And if you've never visited customers before, it's hard to do. And it's, when you're selling a brand new product and a brand new technology and no one's ever heard of you. So if you go to work for a while, you can build all of those things. You'll have lots of interactions that will absolutely benefit you when you do start your company. You may have managed some people, you'll have certainly, maybe you'll have visited customers, maybe you'll even have sold some things. So I think that getting experience before you start a company puts you in a much stronger position to recruit, to raise money, to understand what customer problems are, because you've seen them firsthand. That helps you develop a product that can solve their problems because you understand the problem deeply. So the more you can learn before you do your startup, the more likely you are to succeed, in my opinion.
You've been listening to Don Golini, advisor, angel investor, and chair of Luminate. I'd like to thank all of you for joining this episode of 360 Pulse podcast. I'd also like to give a special thanks to our partners, the Institute of Optics, Genius New York, Luminate Accelerator, AFWorks, Cider Technologies, Archangel Imaging, and AUVSI for their continued support in advancing the future of imaging and optics. We also want to give a shout out to our producer, Scott Fitzgerald at Rockvox Studios, located here in Rochester, New York, the global hub of optics innovation. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. We're available anywhere you listen to your podcasts. If you have a story to share or someone who can contribute to this important conversation, please send me an email directly at Jennifer@Circle Optics. Until next time, thank you for being part of the journey. Together, we are shaping the future of immersive technology.